Good day, everyone. Good day to you, sir. I am Ariel F. Cruda, and we are the Group 3. We're here to present our topic entitled The Self from the Perspective of Anthropology. Distinct societies have different practices. It illustrates how societies see the self and how it connects to our various cultures. Anthropology, on the other hand, has investigated numerous definitions of culture, self, and identity in order to gain a better understanding of the self. So, at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to understand the role of anthropology in defining the self, understand the role of culture in defining the self, understand how culture and self are complementary concepts, and understand what are the perspectives of anthropology towards the self. So, let us begin with the question in mind: what is anthropology? Various experts in this field have concluded that anthropology is the systematic study of the biological, cultural, and social aspects of man. Anthropology came from two Greek words: anthropos, which means man, and logos, which means study or inquiry. In simpler words, anthropology studies the overall nature of man. If you put that in your own perspective, it can be considered to be called as the study of the self, but in a much more systematic manner. Anthropology is connected to how cultural and biological processes interact to shape human experience, because it considers culture as the central focus of its discipline. If we compare it to other disciplines, anthropology contains a holistic and integrated approach in examining the human nature, or what we call the self. According to anthropology professor, namely James L. Peacock, anthropology encroaches on the territory of the sciences as well as the humanities, and transcends the conventional boundaries of both while addressing questions from the distant past and the pressing present, and perhaps with implications for future. So, James L. Peacock's meaning of anthropology is that anthropology can be used to connect both fields of science and social studies. He emphasizes that it is a sort of academic discipline that seeks to comprehend the interconnectedness and interaction of biological element, which is the science, and cultural elements, which is the social studies. Anthropology considers human experience as interplay of nature. When we say interplay, it means the effect they have on each other. So this means that anthropology is the result of the interconnection of human experience, or the culture, and his nature or genetic inheritance as a human person, in which it sets the individual's potentials and uniqueness. As a result, it is possible to conclude that both biological and cultural influences have a major impact on the development of self-awareness among individuals within society. When we examine it, the most essential contribution of anthropology to learning more about oneself is the providing of insights into the nature of self, which is based on a constant knowledge of the basic aspects of culture. So, to further understand what is anthropology, let us tackle about the fields of anthropology.
Thank you, Mr. Cruda, for that wonderful discussion. Good day once again, everyone. I am Charles Kevin R. Carcedo, and today we are going to talk about the different fields of anthropology. We have four different fields of anthropology, namely the social, cultural, linguistic, biological, or physical, and archaeology. First, let's talk about the social anthropology. What is social anthropology? It studies how social patterns and practices and cultural variations develop across different societies. In other words, Social anthropology defines as the study of human societies and cultures around us. It makes us understand more on how people live in societies and how they make their lives meaningful. In this field of anthropology, we seek further answers on questions on how societies are organized, relationship between values and behavior, and why people do such things in their own way. An example of social anthropology is a research using the participant observation. This usually means spending a long period of time living as closely as possible with the community being studied. We can learn their language, share the activities of their daily life, observing and participating in the texture of social interactions, and identify underlying patterns. Second, we have the cultural anthropology. Cultural anthropology studies cultural variations across different societies and examines the need to understand each culture in its own context. Cultural anthropology defines as the scientific studies under cultural, social, biological aspects of life in the past and present. It specifically talks about the beliefs, practices, cognitive, and social organization of human groups. An example of cultural anthropology is ethnology. It is a major division of anthropology that deals with all aspects of past and present human cultures. This includes language, customs, and behavior. Third, we have the linguistic anthropology. From the word itself, linguistic, it studies language and discourse and how they reflect and shape different aspects of human society and culture. In simpler words, it studies the role of language in the social lives of individuals and communities. It explores how language shapes communications. Language plays a huge role in social identity, group membership, and establishing of cultural beliefs or ideology. An example of linguistic anthropology closely is in New Guinea. There is a tribe of indigenous people who speak one language. It is what makes the people unique. This is what we call the index language. Fourth, let's talk about the biological or physical anthropology. In simpler words, biological or physical anthropology studies the origin of humans as well as the interplay between social factors and the processes of human evolution, adaptation, and variation over time. Biological or physical anthropology is the study of human biological variation and evolution. It seeks to document and explain the patterning of biological variation among contemporary human populations. It traces the evolution of our lineage through time in the fossil record. An example of the biological or physical anthropology is the biology of human remains, past diets, and the prevalence of ancient diseases. Fossils, bones, and other remains provide enormous clues regarding the lives of ancient peoples and how they interacted with their environments. Last, let us talk about the archaeology. What is archaeology? Archaeology deals with the prehistoric societies by studying their tools and environment. Explaining further, archaeology is the scientific study of past human behavior and societies from material remains of the earliest human ancestors to recent times. It is primarily concerned with reconstructing extinct cultures from the material remains of past human behavior or the things that people made or used and left behind. An example of archaeology is examining the mummies in the tombs, the scientific study of past human life and culture by the examination of physical remains such as graves, tools, and pottery, the scientific study of life and culture of past and the ancient peoples as by excavation of ancient cities and artifacts.
Hi, I'm Vince A. Paragele and we are gonna talk about what is culture. So, what is culture? The first thing that comes in my mind is that culture is a word that we often came across. We are all part of a culture. We are often intrigued by the other cultures, and also, culture is an integral determinant of who we are as individuals. So, what exactly is it then? Simply put, culture is the unique characteristics of a group of people. Culture is made up of many elements. Some is more obvious than others. Culture is the clothes that we wear, the language we speak, the food we eat, the way we talk. Culture is our customs, our belief, and our values. It is part and parcel of our religious beliefs, superstitions, philosophy, and methodology. Many cultures have common interests, while others may have customs that differ greatly from that of another. Technology has a huge impact on present-day cultures. Many cultures have been altered, including my own, and some have been created due to the rise of technology. Cultures differ so greatly that someone belonging to one culture may not agree with the values of another, which then causes social and ethical issues. That's why it's important to preserve our culture, because this is our identity and plays an essential role in the life of a person and society. It acts as a means of accumulation, storage, and transmission of human experience. It is the culture that shapes people into who they are as they gain knowledge, learn the language, symbols, values, norms, customs, and tradition. Next is Dr. Trihandis. He is known as the father of cross-cultural psychology. He served as a president of multiple psychological associations and is well known for his influential research developing the cultural constructions of individualism and collectivism, the self, and the interpersonal behavior. And one of his famous research is about the three aspects of self, which are the private self, public self, and collecting self. The first thing that we're going to talk about is, of course, private self. From the word itself, it is all about you. What do you think of yourselves? For example, am I a good person? Am I honest? Am I a hardworking student? Am I studious? And many others. And the second one is about public self. Public self is the way a person perceives others. For example, the last time we met with Cyril Dunn, he let us know what kind of person he is just by looking at his Facebook photos and videos. And we immediately concluded that he is a good person, a hard-working person, a food lover, loves to travel, and also he is so jolly. The next is about the collective self. Collective self is a person of sense of belonging to a social group. For example, I feel the sense of attachment when I'm studying with my friends, or when you're in outing, or with bonding with your friends. This is also one of the important things in being a seafarer. You need to know how to socialize people to avoid being an outcast that will cause discrimination or even worse, like sabotaging. Triandes also suggests that different cultures emphasize different aspects of the self. In collectivistic societies, the public and collective selves are given greater emphasis than the private self. In individualistic societies, the private self receives the greatest emphasis. So for further information, we will listen to the next reporter.
Good day, cadets. I'm going to discuss about the three dimensions of cultural variation, and we are going to tackle all the three dimensions of cultural variation. So, cultural variation refers to the difference in social behaviors that different cultures exhibit around the world. What may be considered good etiquette in one culture may be considered bad etiquette in another. Thus, Dr. Harry Tryans discussed the three dimensions of cultural variation in order to explain how this cultural variation affects the aspect of self. So, what's the three dimension of cultural variation? It's the individualism, collectivism, tight and loose, and then the culture complexity. So, what's the concept of individualism? Individualism, political and social philosophy emphasize the moral worth of individual. Although the concept of an individual may seem straightforward, there are many ways of understanding it both in theory and practice. So guys, you wonder what's an example of individualism. So, the example of individualism, when you support yourself financially and do not depend on anyone else for your needs. This is an example of individualism. When government allows citizens to be responsible for their own retirement instead of relying on social security. This is an example of individualism or individual character individuality. So have you ever guys wondered what is the difference between individualism and individual? As announced, the difference between the individualism and individual is that individualism is the tendency of a person to act without reference to another, or particularly in matters of style, fashion, or mode of thought, while individual person is considered alone. Alone is like siya lang, rather than belonging of a group of people. So yeah, that's the meaning of the difference between individual and individualism. Okay, so the collectivism, guys, what is collectivism means? Okay, collectivism, any of several types social organization in which the individual is seen as being subordinate to a social collectivity such as a state, a nation, a race, or a social class. Collectivism may be contrasted with the individual, in which the right of interest individual are emphasized. So yeah, and if you're wondering what examples of collectivism, collectivism is in a cultural terms referred to a culture that privileges and family community over individuals. For example, children in collectivist societies are likely to take care of elderly parents if they fall ill and will change their own plans in the event of a family emergency. So that's it. And the other one, guys, for example, the church has criticized the great emphasis placed on individualism rather than collectivism. So that's the example of a collectivism. And then to the next page, we're going to the tightness and the looseness. So tight society, guys, is characterized by Gelfand in her book, which is the Rule Creators Run the Show Breakers. How tight and free societies wire our world are those in which social standards are clearly characterized and dependently forced, taking off taking up small room of a person, ad-lib translation, illustrations, nations with site societies, incorporate China, France, India, Japan, and Singapore. Those countries are site societies, guys. And when it comes to loose societies, we're here in a looseness, guys. That loose societies are those in which social standards are adaptable and casual. They are proposed desires but allow people to characterize the run of the middle of the road behavior inside which they may work, claim, and inclination. In this way, authorization in free societies is cleared out to intrapersonal instrument illustrations of nations with free societies incorporate. So these countries, guys, for example, Australia, Belgium, Israel, New Zealand, and then what I mean is unused Zealand and joined together state. So that's the loose society. What do you call it? A country, guys. A country which has the loose society. Okay, so loose cultures are those in which social norms are flexible or informal. And I have an example, guys, about a country. For example, American can wear bikini anywhere in their country or any place in the world. Like they can wear like bikini, guys. For example, in their country, they can wear bikini and what do you call this one in the sea or maybe in other places. Like for them, like it's fine. Like they're a liberated person in and then for example this country a loose country which is the North Korea, they can because they're tight because they're tight. I can just see right through it, the guys, that North Korea has the very very tight society. Okay, and then we're gonna tackle right now is the culture complexity. So guys, what is culture complexity? Complexity culture is the best understood through the lens of complexity. This means looking at a culture as a system that consists of many different parts which interact each other. So guys, nakaka-interact complex, guys. Like you can interact to each other, guys. Okay. And then, okay, if you guys ask for an example, so here's a distinctive partners of activities, belief, rights, and traditions associated with one central feature of life. In particular culture, an example of cluster of activity, ceremony, folklore, songs, stories associated with the hunting and use of a buffalo by native people. Okay? So that's it, guys. Like you can interact to one another, like to other person, and yeah, that's it, cadets. Thank you.
The Filipino self-embedded in culture. Jose Ataiza Salazar is a Filipino historian and anthropologist and philosopher of history, best known in pioneering an immic perspective in a Philippine history called Pantayong Pananaw, from us perspective, earning him the title Father of New Philippine Historiography and Father of Pantayong Pananaw. Salazar proceeded to enter University of Philippines, Diliman, where he took up Bachelor of Arts in History and graduated in 1955, and he was the first summa cum laude of history program of UP. His more than a decade of study in Europe made him a polyglot, which means who could speak and write various languages including Spanish, French, German, Russian, Bahasa, among others. After his rigorous training in Paris, Salazar returned to the Philippines and joined the faculty of UP Department of History, where he taught for 30 years. He used Filipino as a medium communication from the very start of teaching career in 1969, following the tradition that was started in 1965 by his mentor, Guadalupe Flores Ganzon. Zeus Atayza Salazar was one of the founder of Pabansang Samahan, Psikolohiyang Filipino, Asosasyon ng mga Dalubhasa, Mahilig at Interes sa Kasaysayan ng Pilipinas, Inc., Bahay sa Liksikan, sa Kasaysayan, Inc., and UP, Lipunang Pangkasaysayan. Salazar's greatest contribution to the social sciences in the Philippines was the definition of history and pantayong pananaw. According to Salazar, the story of specific community or nation should be construed primarily on the basis of the internal flow of its history. According to Salazar, our history is a narrative based on the past that signifies the whole of a person or generation. The new history is a combination of ideas from the patriotic movement and pantayong pananaw of the whole self as a Filipino. If history is written record, kasaysayan is saysay having two meaning in a narrative sense of or meaning. Therefore, kasaysayan is salaysay na may saysay or meaningful narrative. Zeus Salazar developed pantayong pananaw, a self-reflective view in the study of the Philippines history. He is considered one of the most illustrious historians to follow the greatest nationalist historian Teodoro A. Agoncillo and Renato Constantino. His conceptual framework of pantayong pananaw in Philippines social science refreshing the national perspective that lost its luster after the Marcos year. Pantayong pananaw has provided a powerful framework for a new generation of Philippine scholars in writing the history and culture of the Filipino inert masses. With the arrival of Western colonizer, Philippine historiography was framed in the Western language and ideology, a bias that has been continued for several generations of Philippine historians. Salazar devoted many of his writing to redress this imbalance of a Filipino self-representation and discourse. His analysis affected many of the approaches to writing social sciences, especially psychology. Let's have Mr. Batuigas to explain further what is the pantayong pananaw.
Pantayong pananaw, a self-reflective view in the study of the Philippine history. Do you know that our language and history is still problematic in the present day? Because, according to old times, history is a written record of past events, and the traditional historians believed that no documents means no history. Well, only the writings of the foreign conquerors became the basis of our knowledge as to what our past is, because, in the first place, our ancestors didn't write any documentaries about it. That's why we have already carried the colonial perspectives towards ourselves, such as we are inferior to the foreigners and all of the amazing things that happened came from them. And also, because of our overemphasis on foreign languages, there has been a separation between the educated and the people or the masses. And the history books are mostly written in English, in which it is very essential for us to understand. Then how can the Filipinos read these kinds of writings? And as of today, we degrade or belittle those people who cannot speak nor understand English in our society. Also, in what country have you seen anyone who speaks their vernacular language in school is fined a peso for each word, or in other words, embracing native language seems to be a crime. That is why Dr. Zeus A. Salazar developed the use of the Filipino language so that many people could understand the origin of history. By this, he created his own phrase, which is the pantayong pananaw, which came from the word tayo or we. He published an academic writing entitled Pantayong Pananaw, Ugat at Kabuluhan, which are composed of stories and history of the Filipino, which are transcribed into our own national language, which is Tagalog. But what do you think the difference of this to the works of Jose Rizal, Teodoro Agoncillo, and Renato Constantino, which wrote books and papers using a foreign language but still a nationalist? Well, the only difference is that he used the national language which all of the Filipino can comprehend. Dr. Zeus Salazar also identified different perspectives or pananaw, which are pansila, which means from you to your perspectives, pangkayo, which means from you for us perspective, the pangkami, which means from us to you perspective. According to him, long time ago before the Spanish colonials arrived, the pantayong pananaw is prevailing in telling epics such as the story of Biag ni Lamang and other folk tales in different group of people in the Philippines. Take note that puok is the term used for the culture that they are sharing in a group. But when the Spanish arrived, they wrote records about the Filipino and reported it to their Spanish kapuok. Then, Zeus Salazar named it as the Pansilang Pananaw. The Spanish also narrates about the Filipinos to the Indios, or a term referring to the indigenous people of the Americans, which are not even their kapuok, and then he named it the Pangkayo Pananaw. When Jose Rizal and the Paganismo came, they defended the Filipinos, but their audience are the Spanish, by using foreign language. That's why Salazar called it the Pangkami. To make it simple, Pansilang Pananaw, it is a perspective that identify others and not their fellow men. They used their own language in order to explain the other culture or the foreign culture to their countrymen. Example for this is when the Spanish forwarded the informations regarding the nature of Filipinos to their countrymen. Pangkayong pananaw is a perspective that communicates from the outside towards insiders of a particular culture and tackles about other people and their natures. Example for the Pangkayong pananaw is when the Spanish forwarded the information about the Filipino and their natures to the Indio, which are not even their countrymen, or in other words, outsiders. And lastly, the Pangkami Pananaw. It is a perspective that communicates to outsiders and not the Filipino themselves. The language used is foreign and has a tendency to view our country as an object or topic of learning from the outside. Example for this is the work of Jose Rizal, the El Filibusterismo and the No Limitang, which are written in Spanish.
Colonial discursive strategies, works and authors categorized as pantayong pananaw, or having affinities with pantayong pananaw, exhibit a certain style of thought and way of speaking based largely on a critique of colonial discursive strategies which up to now still proliferate in textbooks and more scholarly works. Discourses of influence which attributes the origins of both the distinguishing elements in the most motive forces of Philippine history. Culture to external influence, these are also manifested as symptoms of unease or discontent with one's own culture and of a constant striving to legitimize it by attributing its origin to some more elevated sources. To the point, references of the discourse of influence is usually the originating culture, while receiving culture is merely analyzed in relation to adequacy to or divergence from the original. Example, Maria is beautiful because her father was half Spanish. The Filipino is a jumble of traits from India, China, Europe, and America. Discourses which focus on the purported lack of identity of Filipinos is an auxiliary discourse which accomplishes the preliminary act of emptying Filipinos' identity the better to fill into the dream which influences first Filipino discuss. Reduce Philippine history to the lay repetition of Western history. because Philippines is the only country in Southeast Asia that was subjected to Western colonization. Before it had the opportunity to develop either a centralized government ruling over a large territory or dominant culture in ancient times, inhabitants of the Philippines were a diverse agglomeration of people who arrived in various waves of immigration from Asian mainland and who maintained little contact with each other. Presupposes that the Western comparison would render the topic of more intelligible to the reader than if it were just left it to itself, which is described as the inclusive form of we refers to a collectivity composed of both the speakers and the listeners. In communication context, which is described as the inclusive form of we refers to a collectivity composed only of those who are speaking and does not include the receivers of the message. Example, Juan de la Cruz was the first Filipino pilot. Gabriela Selang was the Juan Arc of the Philippines. Discussions of the discovery. These are the discussions regarding the major discoveries in the country. Merely correct colonial misconceptions about Filipinos and Philippine history, thereby remaining trapped in discursive dependency with colonial discourse. Political, cultural power both explicit and implicit. Throughout the colonial and post-colonial Philippines, I believe that the three distinguished Filipino historians as shown in the days suggest a provocative approach towards post-colonial discourse, as well as towards globalization, expression of condemnation or idealization of Philippine culture as contrast with colonial Western values can be related to this type of discourse. Discourses of influence which attributes the origins of both the distinguishing elements and the motive forces of Philippine history and culture of external influence. These are also manifested as symptoms of unease or discontent with one's own culture and of a constant striving to legitimize it by attributing its origin to some more elevated sources. The point of reference of these discourses of influence is usually the originated culture, while the receiving culture is merely analyzed in relation to its adequacy to a divergence from the original and then Western liberal.
So let's talk about the three categories of Filipino personhood cover. According to Prospero Covar, the Filipino culture is influenced by the person itself, as research was titled Labas, Loob at Lalim, which means the person as a whole. Labas is a physical appearance, face, nose, skin, etc. There are example of labas. Negritos has a black skin, Bicolanos has a flat nose, Ilocanos has a fair skin tone. Loob is a two concept, and these are katauhan ng pagkatao. Labas is a psychomoral attitudes or habits that distinguish individuals from another. It is the complex or one behavioral and emotional tendencies. It is just not structure or organization of these qualities, but it is whole these qualities that gives form and meaning to an individual and his extensions. Moral character, on the other hand, is understood to be a mainly dynamic and secondarily static. It is related to personality and initially determined by it. The concrete sense character is the aspect which means constitutes one's identity, which structure him and not as subject but further as a moral subject and moral agent. Personality or character, the core of both personality and character is the ego or the self, manifests itself either as personality as a character. Lalim is a spiritual and moral beliefs. Filipino spirituality, this includes an procession and it is example of kanata. Catholic religion saying prayer as and attending Catholic Mass are some notable activities. Good morals or pagmamano and forgiving others are some example. And those were are the example of labas, loob at lalim.